recognizing her. I love it. Right. So, Patrick, are we live yet? We are live. Wonderful. Well, I'll start over again then. Good evening, everybody, and virtual audience. Thank you for joining us. I'm Barbara Peters. I'm the owner of the Poison Pen. This is our 35th and a half year here in Scottsdale, and we do this almost every day, sometimes 2 or 3. Tomorrow will be twice in one day. That's why we have so many videos. We have a really interesting, I think, because I write it, e-newsletter, which you are welcome to sign up on our website or sign up at the front calendar when you go, and that way you will be able to keep up with all the authors that we have visiting us. And it's an extremely wide range. Some of them are from England, some of them from Canada, although that may stop temporarily. We've actually created Canadian bookmarks to give them a little boost. And we do have a lot of Southwest authors, but basically crime fiction, which is not the only thing we do, is a very broad umbrella, isn't it, Ian? You have to use your microphone. Is it on?
Is it on? Okay, great.
All right.
Yeah.
Can they hear you? Try it.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
Great,
Splendid.
great.
So Ann and I have been friends for God knows how long, probably 30 years. And when he was alive, let me put you in context here. I first came to Scottsdale in 1950 when I was 10 years old. There were 2 paved roads. The city was not yet incorporated. You had to take a buckboard from Terminal 1, doesn't even exist anymore, to the Camelback Inn, and it was a day trip to Taliesin or up to Cave Creek, okay? So I read Tony Hillerman in real time from The Blessing Way. We could say that about almost everybody but Raymond Chandler or Agatha Christie. But anyway, I remember when Tony published The Blessing Way, and many of you may not have heard this story, but it remains one of my favorites. When he turned, and I knew the editor that said this, when he turned the book in to his publisher, HarperCollins, who is Ann's publisher, they read it and the editor liked it, but he sent back a note and he said, "Good book, lose the Indian stuff." But I will say this, that I think it might be difficult for Tony to get his books published today because there's this whole thing about how you have to be authentically that person. You have to be Latino if you want to write this. You have to be gay if you want to write that. You have to be, black if you want to write that. And so did that have anything to do with your creating Bernie?
No.
Oh, well.
No, I loved Bernie. I mean, my dad created Bernie, and he created her as kind of a sweet, basically incompetent police woman who was desperately in love with Jim Chi, and that was kind of Bernie's role. And I thought that she had more potential. So, and I even talked to Dad about it after Skeleton Man, which was his second to last book. In that book, Bernie almost gets to be a full-fledged crime solver. She finds the bad guys. She saves a woman who's been kidnapped. She finds stolen diamonds. She's really on a roll. But then, because my dad loved Jim Chi and Joe Leaphorn, there's a flash flood in the Grand Canyon. Everything is chaotic. Jim Chi arrives, saves Bernie, refines the diamonds, re-arrests the bad guys. And so after I read that, I had a little talk with my dad. I did most of the talking, actually. And I said, I really love this book. And I love the way you gave Bernie a lot more gumption. And I think your readers would really enjoy, after all, I don't know, that was maybe his 17th book. After all these books, I think your readers would enjoy seeing her finally make the next step and actually be a competent policewoman. And there's this silence in Dad's office. And then he gives me this little smile and he says, "Oh, honey, what an interesting idea." Okay. I knew he was never, ever going to do it.
It's not going to happen.
And I was glad. I mean, after he died and I thought maybe I could write a mystery, I was really glad that he hadn't done that because it gave me a way to continue the series without having to be Tony Hillerman.
That's right. So we'll come back to that. But since she's mentioned Tony, I want to point out 2 books to you that you might not have did. I was really privileged to debut Tony's biography, memoir actually, called Seldom Disappointed. It's an absolutely wonderful book. And I can still remember, you weren't here, but we did that over at the Scottsdale Library, which has an auditorium not among my favorites. It's kind of cavernous. But anyway, we were there. It was completely full. It holds 300 people. And I thought, I mean, I love the book. And my rule is whatever event we do, I have to have read the book because you never know what's going to happen. So I introduced your dad. We had even sold the art. You know, those, some of you may not know that publishers will license the artwork and so forth. So for a long time, I don't know if you ever saw them. We had the artwork for the covers for the Tony Hillerman books here for sale. So anyway, I introduced Tony and I went and quietly sat down and he went up to the front of the stage and he looked at the audience and he looked back at me and he said, "I can't do this." And I realized he was so deaf by then that he did not think that he could talk to the audience. So I rose gracefully to my feet. And for 90 minutes, we talked and answered questions in the whole bit. When it was over, he said to me, "I have to go to the Library of Congress for the National Book Festival." And he said, "I can't do that without you either. So if you were to go to the Library of Congress website, loc.gov, you can actually find Tony and me talking on stage." But my favorite moment of it was the time of the 2 shooters in Washington, D.C. Do you remember those 2 really weird guys? And so we're on the National Mall in a tent. And Tony looked at me as we strolled out, to like 2,000 people and all the rest of it. And he looked at me and he said, "Is this wise? Should we be there?" And I said to him, looking at the security, "This is probably the safest place to be in Washington." He had such a great sense of humor. But I recommend Seldom Disappointed to you. And then there is a biography rather than a memoir, which Ann and I both participated in, by James McGrath Morris, called Tony Hillerman, A Life. So if you're interested in Hillerman family history, that'll be it. But anyway, when Tony died, Ann had come, or shortly after, Ann and her husband came to do a book. What was the name of the book? Was it New Mexico Landscapes or something?
Tony Hillerman's Landscapes.
Oh, it was Tony
Yeah.
Hillerman's Landscapes.
And the subtitle was On the Road with Chi and Leaphorn.
Right.
Yeah.
We're supposed to have 2 copies of it in the bookstore, and I crawled into the window before this started looking for them. I'll try to find them afterward. But anyway, we are here, and we're all feeling sad about Tony. And I said to Ann, you could write this. And you looked at me. I know. And so I pushed you really hard, didn't I? Yep.
This is a true story.
It is a true story. Right. So more or less.
You could say this was the site of inception.
It was. It was like a virgin birth.
Yeah.
I know. But anyway, I am really glad that we had that conversation. Now, some of you we're eventually going to talk about the book. Hang on. But we have to fill an hour and we can't spoil the plot. So we always digress. Those of you who are regulars already know this. Right now, what was I going to say? I've forgotten something important.
Something about Spider-Woman's daughter. Well, Barbara did encourage me. That is an absolutely true story.
Okay, I do know what it was. And a person sitting in the back who's a distinguished lawyer actually asked me this question. How is it that Ann can take over writing Tony's characters and Tony's series? Now, you might think that is because they're related. It's a family thing. But some of you may realize that in other kinds of series and so forth, complete strangers take over writing books, like Robert B. Parker, for example, or Robert Ludlum, or whatever. So did you actually go through any sort of formal thing, or did HarperCollins not challenge you, nor did your mother?
No, I didn't go through any formal thing. Luckily I had met Dad's editor. I'd gone with him to one of the awards that he got, and he introduced me to her. So when I had the idea that maybe I could write a mystery, I thought, gosh, I don't know anything about the legal aspects of this. I don't. Does Harper have all the rights to the characters? And so I called the editor, or maybe I emailed her. Anyway, I contacted her and I said, I've got this crazy idea that maybe I could write a mystery. And would there be any problem with me using Jim Chi, Joe, and Joe Leaphorn and Bernie Manuelito and the other characters? And she said, no, go ahead, give it a shot. And then she said, when you're ready, I would be glad to see whatever you come up with. So that gave me courage. And then my mother had been my dad's first and best editor ever since Blessing Way for many, many years. And she was like the godmother of Jim Chi and Joe Leaphorn. So I thought, I don't want to do anything that's going to upset her. I mean, she was already desperately missing my dad. I thought, I can't screw this up. So I asked her what she would think. And she said, sure, I think your dad would be happy if you could, do something to keep his stories going. So yeah, with those two affirmations, I proceeded. And I have to say, if in retrospect, how as you get older, you always think, oh, if only I'd done such and such. Well, when I was in college, I never took any classes in fiction writing. And I think it might have helped me. It's sort of hard to learn to write a book as you're writing the book. But anyway, with my mom's help, I muddled through. And
You did really well. As long, it was in the family, so there wouldn't have been any legal challenges. But if a random person had suddenly decided that they were going to write these books, there's a thing called fan fiction, but you can't really get away with that. You and your mother could have challenged those people. So, that's how it goes. I always encourage authors, the hundreds of them that go through here, to think about their literary estate. If you don't want anybody to write your characters when you leave us, then you need to have a literary executor and a literary estate and make sure that doesn't happen. If, on the other hand, you do, if you're leaving widows and orphans and other things, and you do want it to continue, then you can say that as well. But I was pretty sure your arrangement was entirely informal based upon our conversation.
Yeah, and my dad and I never talked about it either. I know, in addition to Barbara, several of my friends, as Dad was getting older, they said, why don't you and Tony do a book together? Why don't you, talk to him about it? But those characters were just so intrinsic to who my dad was. I didn't want to imagine the world without him. But also, I just couldn't, while he was alive, I couldn't picture myself writing those books. But then after he died, and I did events with the book that Barbara mentioned, the Tony Hillerman landscape book. And whenever, that was a nonfiction book with photos. You should order it from Barbara. It's beautiful. Anyway, it was places that my dad loved on the Navajo Nation and wrote about. And whenever I talked about that book, people would always ask, so are there going to be any more Jim Chi, Joe Leaphorn mysteries? Did Dad have anything, with an agent, with an editor, almost ready to pop out? And I would have to say no. And I heard that so many times. And I realized, besides missing my dad, I was going to be missing those characters too. So that book that I hadn't thought would lead to me writing a novel really was the stepping stone. And to do that book, I reread all of Dad's books. So his voice and the characters were really strongly in my mind. And that made it a lot easier when I decided to try to write my first novel.
Yeah, but you did have a background in journalism and other things, so it wasn't like you were, a complete novice at writing.
Yeah, that's right. And I had written some, besides the Tony Hillerman landscape book, I'd written some other nonfiction books. So I knew how to work with editors. I knew in journalism, you're lucky if you get to write more than 1,000 words. But so I knew how to put together a book that was 200 pages. But I had never written fiction. I had never used my imagination to come up with a crime and come up with the bad guys and figure all that stuff out. So it was really fun.
It has been fun for you. I know you've had a wonderful time. We both have, right? So in order to write this is this the 10th?
Yes.
Right. That's a lot. 10 more books, right?
Yeah. I never would have expected it.
No.
I'm really happy about it.
One thing Anne does, which I particularly like, is that she has toured us around the very wide edges of the Navajo. The Malpais, for example. Tony kind of stuck closer to home, but one book we're in the Malpais, the lava fields that you can pass on Highway 40 as you're heading towards New Mexico. We've been up to the, is it the Rainbow? What's the name of the bridge?
Yeah, Rainbow Bridge.
It is the Rainbow
Yeah.
Bridge. Okay, so you get to tour the Navajo Nation, which is, as you probably know, extremely large. In this book, we get to go in two directions. We get to go to Phoenix. Those of you who live here are going to recognize what one plot thread is all about if you've been reading the news. It will not completely surprise you. And the other one goes to Shiprock. Now, how many of you have been to Shiprock or driven past it? Right. I mean, isn't it great the way it just rises up like some ship, like a galleon under sail? I've always, especially coming down from Durango, I think, when you see it in the distance, and it always looks closer than it actually is. You have to drive a long way. So Shiprock is another landmark, and that's the other story arc. So we're covering a lot of ground in this book, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So
And it's interesting. The last time I was here, I drove the route that my characters now take from Gallup, basically from Phoenix all the way into Gallup, and it was very inspirational. I mean, it's beautiful scenery. I don't talk too much about the scenery in this book because I'm trying to move the story forward. I mean, I think it's enough, but it's not like reading National Geographic.
I can remember the first time I came to Phoenix, that very 1950 I'm telling you about. The way back to Chicago, where I'm from, was Route 66. And so you had to go north and catch it, and then it did go to Gallup. We actually spent the night in Gallup, New Mexico, where my grandfather put us in lockdown. Right, and then on we went. So there was a map. Do you remember the name of the company? There was a wonderful map that some company in Colorado made where he had the routes of all the books that that were featured in Anne and Tony's books. We sold hundreds of them. People would come in and buy them and then go drive them. You know, I mean, it was, was it called Time Traveler's Maps?
Right. The gentleman named Frank Lister was
Right.
the one who put
but
those
what
together.
was great was that it was all about Tony. But when we got to Anne's second book, he included Anne. He added her to it, and then he started updating it. Is he still doing it? Because I am not clear that he is.
I haven't seen it for a while. I think he's several books behind on my books. I have to give him a nudge.
Okay, well, we don't have any, so that was not a sales pitch. But I thought it was a wonderful idea that you can actually yourself go to the places that both Anne and Tony write about. Right. So tell us about why the solstice is so important, and why is that part of the title of this book?
Well, this kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about scenery. I've always I love living in the Southwest. I grew up in Santa Fe. And I poked around a lot with my dad and then as an adult. And one of my favorite places is Chaco Canyon. And I had been there several times, but and one of the most famous things about Chaco Canyon is the solstice marker. So I had been there. I never had been there on the solstice, but I'd been there many times and seen it. And it always stayed in my mind, that beautiful landscape and the ruins, the whole thing about it. So Shadow of the Solstice, as Barbara said, there are two stories. And I was thinking, I love both stories, but I was not quite finding a way to tie them together. And so then as I kept working on it, the idea that both of them would be happening around the time of the solstice was kind of the thread that led me to link them.
Right. So we haven't really talked about, we know about Jim. Joe Leaphorn is pretty much sidelined in this. I think he has a cameo at the end, if I recall right, but this is not. It would be hard for him to do this amount of traveling, and there's a lot of action in this book when he might have gotten hurt.
And also, he had a hard job in the last book, in Lost Birds. Poor Joe, he really worked hard, so I thought he deserved a little vacation.
A little rest.
Yeah.
Well, at least you didn't send him to Hawaii this time. I know. Okay, right. So...
So one thing that I really like about this book, and this goes back to what you were talking about before. Usually when I write a book, it's like the scenery is in my mind, and then I think, what would be a story that would go with the scenery? But in this book, the story of the fake sober living homes, you all who live here probably have heard that story forever. Anyway, I was in Tucson at the time, and the Tucson papers covered it. And the more I heard of that story, the more I thought it was just such an outrageously awful awful thing. And then at the end, these were people addicted to drugs, some homeless people who were basically kidnapped and brought to Phoenix with the promise that they would be given help for their addiction. And they weren't helped. Often they were just, if they discovered that they were being scammed, they were just turned out on the street, or else they had to escape. And the whole idea was stealing their Medicaid money and the indigenous money. But the thing that I think really moved it from just a terrible story to an idea that might fit in my books was when the Navajo Nation decided that they would send their police force to come to Phoenix to help find these people and bring them home. And I don't know. I feel like I'm part of that police force because I've written about them for so long. And I thought this is a great thing. I mean, this kind of goes back to the protect and serve and, beyond the call of duty. It was out of their jurisdiction, but they worked with the police in Phoenix. So I thought I have to do something with this story, and I can maybe make it some kind of a mystery. And even though it's familiar to those of us here in Arizona, a lot of people had never heard of it. So it had that element of mystery for people who weren't Arizonans. And then the other story had to do with another thing that was in the news, which was the resumption of uranium mining on the south side of the Grand Canyon. And the trucks that were hauling this ore were going through the Navajo Nation, and the Navajo government and a lot of just average Navajo people were furious about this. So there were a lot of demonstrations and a lot of protest of this. And eventually the Navajo Nation got the company that was hauling the uranium to make some compromises, to cover the loads, to let them know when they were coming, and also to pay for some remediation of some old uranium sites that had never been taken care of. So I thought, I've never written about uranium, and uranium is such a huge issue on the Navajo Nation. I thought, well, this would be something good. How can I make a mystery out of this? So those two ideas were kind of spinning in my brain, and then I guess like nuclear physics or something, they just collided, and there was the story. But it was not quite that easy, but eventually it got turned into a book.
So the short answer was you kill someone, right, and leave them. Leave them up there on the by the uranium mine. And also another thing that I think you were probably inspired by the real disaster of the people in Sedona who were in some kind of a sweat lodge or something, remember? That was not adequately ventilated, and some of them died. So that's another feature. So your journalism background really kicked in this book.
Yeah, it did for
right?
sure.
In fact, some of the swindlers are still being prosecuted. I think I read about it. And the Republic has they're doing a good job with local stories. And I think today, if I remember right, they're still going after the Medicare fraud that prevailed, right?
Yeah, that's right. There's some kind of a class action suit now. They're saying that something like 40 Navajo people died as part of this, and maybe more. I mean, I think it would be really hard to track. So they're trying to get some restitution for their families.
Sure. Well, in order to do this 2-track plot, if we have Bernie and Chi going to investigate homicide and the other things happening by the uranium mine, who is going to Phoenix? And the answer is Bernie's sister, Darlene, right, who has been a bit of a loose cannon as we have progressed along this line. But I did like the fact that you gave Darlene a pretty good role in this book.
Well, thank you. When my dad first created this series, Bernie was kind of a minor character. So when I decided maybe I could write a mystery, I thought to bring her up as an interesting character in an ongoing series, I need to flesh her out. So I gave her a mother who was full of advice that Bernie really didn't want. And then I created Darlene, kind of a wild card little sister she's like a early 20s teenager when we first meet her, and she likes to drink, and she's an artist, but she doesn't quite know what to do with herself. And so she's been evolving in my 9 books. So, and I always really liked her, and I always wanted something good to happen to her. So it's funny to talk. It's like I feel like she's my own sister or something. But anyway, in Shadow of the Solstice, I thought in the book before this, Darlene has decided that maybe she'll be a nurse, so she's gone back to school. So I thought, well, if you want to be in healthcare, you probably want to get a job in healthcare. So I gave Darlene a job working as kind of a home health aide, helping people check their diabetes and their blood pressure, and just kind of checking in on them to make sure they're doing okay. So one of her clients is this woman named Mrs. Raymond. And Darlene and Mrs. Raymond have a wonderful relationship. They both like each other. And so one day Darlene goes to check on Mrs. Raymond, and Mrs. Raymond is not there. And so that's kind of the start of the mystery that gets Darlene involved. And it was the other continuing character, of course, is Bernie and Darlene's mom, and she's been steadily declining through all of my books. And so it was nice to write about this Mrs. Raymond, who is really a pretty sharp, take charge older woman who does a lot of very heroic things, I would say, in Shadow of the Solstice. And I liked her because she provided such a nice contrast to Darlene's mom, who was declining.
Why did you decide to have her decline?
That's a good question. I think because it's just kind of the natural progression of people. And it just seemed like she had served her purpose maybe in my books. So, I mean, when I first introduced her, I think Darlene and her sister kind of needed a lot of motherly advice. And now they're both really mature women who are on their own. And also it kind of gave me a chance to write about another conflict that a lot of people have, which is you're dealing with a job, you're dealing with a husband, and then you're dealing with a person who you love who needs a lot more attention than you can probably give her.
Can I say something biographical?
Sure.
Well, Anne herself had to deal with that. And I think that's one reason your late husband, he was a lovely guy and a wonderful photographer. I remember going to his last exhibit at the at the library in Santa Fe. Beautiful photographs. But we watched him decline, and Anne took care of him. And I think that you can see that is with Mama and the sisters doing that. That's a hard thing to do, isn't it?
It was a hard thing, but I was grateful really to have had that experience. I think it's just part of life, and you learn, it opens your heart to be dealing with someone you love and watching them decline. I'm sure a lot of you in this room have had that same experience. And I mean, I still love Don. I will always love him, but I was kind of relieved when he went on to his next great adventure. It was like he was ready.
He was ready. In fact, he was the photographer in Tony Hillerman's landscapes. The photographs in that book, Don took them, right?
Right.
So
right,
it was a really nice collaborative effort. But I was thinking, reading this book, I could kind of see you and Don in my mind when I'm reading about, Darlene and Chi, who really steps up. Jim Chi really steps up to take care of Mama, which I think is great because, that's not always the case.
It also gave me a chance to talk a little bit, although I don't do it directly, about how the Navajo world has changed. I mean, it used to be that there was a strong taboo of with a mother-in-law even looking at her son-in-law. But now, they're modern people and they do what they need to be done. I think that's one reason the Navajo people have survived for so long. They have that really practical resilience.
Yeah, but going all the way back to the Blessing Way, that's the first time I knew about how Navajo felt when people died. At home, when I taught crime fiction at ASU in the 90s for 3 or 4 years, and then things just got too busy here, so I had to stop. One of the books that we looked at was Thief of Time, which is the book that Tony wrote that won the Edgar Award, and it involved academics fighting over prestige and pottery and so forth in New Mexico. I remember the students kept saying to me, seriously, people killed for that, And I said, sure, when the stakes are that low, the conflict is that high, as the saying goes. I've lost my train of thought again. Why do I keep going off into? It must be my age.
Well, one thing talking about my photographer husband. I mean, it was wonderful to work with him. And when we did that Tony Hillerman landscape book, we really enjoyed being in that landscape and talking to so many Navajo people who had known my dad and really, respected him. And anyway, I love Don dearly, but Don was not a reader. He read a little nonfiction. He never read any of my books. And it was okay. You love people for who they are. But anyway, Don died in 2020, and I remarried a guy who wrote me a fan letter because his ex-wife had been reading my books and said, "Oh, you love Tony Hillerman, and you should read Anne." And anyway, we got married last summer, and it's so different because he is like an avid mystery reader, and he'll say, "Oh, I read the new Robert Kreis, and I liked it pretty well, but right here, this should have had a little more and right here it was just perfect." And it's like it's such an amazing gift to be able to talk about my work with somebody who really is not only my fan, but just a fan of the whole genre. And he also is a really good editor.
Right. I was just going to say, you've acquired an in-house editor. Okay, so I remember what I was going to say while teaching this class. We one session is that we went to ASU has a very strong anthropology department, and we went to when reading Thief of Time, because there are bones involved and all, we went to the anthropology department where they were spreading things out and talking to us. And I had 3 Navajo students in the class, and I realized that they would not be able to go with me. And I had to come up with something else for them, to do to earn whatever credit it was. And, that really brought home to me how strong those traditions are. Remember reading The Ghost Way and all. And I think your dad did an amazing job in writing about all of that. There's one book, if you have read Darkwind, isn't it? The Zuni? Right. So I'm actually wearing my mother's squash blossom necklace from the 1930s. And I will tell you that Navajo jewelry was made for men. It's really heavy. But if you look, the 2 bracelets, the Zuni bracelet has a completely different design. It's kind of like, what do they call it, needlepoint?
That's right, needlepoint.
Right. And so, I always think about, in many ways, Darkwind's one of my favorite books of your dad's because it was one where we got to see yet another. He did write about the Hopi in Sacred Clowns, but Darkwind, I thought, was the only one that he really went into the Zuni.
Yeah, and Dance Hall of the Dead. Dance Hall of the Dead.
No, I'm sorry. I'm confusing that with the TV program. It is Dance Hall of the Dead, right?
Dance Hall of the Dead deals
Dark
with
Winds is in season what?
Season 3.
Right.
Season 3.
So, yep, it was Dance Hall of the Dead. And that is the second book, isn't it? After the Blessing
That's
Way?
right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
The second Navajo book.
Right.
The second Indian book.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, back to my original question. What is so important about the solstice? We talked about Chaka and we talked about the sun thing, but why is it that the people who are up to no good near Shiprock are choosing the solstice as the time to get up to no good?
Well, as you all probably know, the solstice is the longest day of the summer. And there are a lot of spiritual beliefs around the solstice, a lot of Celtics, like any sort of paganish kind of group would celebrate the solstice. So in Shadow of the Solstice, there's this group that has rented like a revival site on the Navajo Nation for the solstice, and they're coming together and they're going to have a big meditation. And fire is also part of the solstice celebration because the sun, fire makes sense. Well, simultaneously, a big official from Washington is supposedly coming to Shiprock. And so, the Navajo people who have rented the site to the people who've come from elsewhere, I have to interrupt myself. One thing that my dad did that I have kind of picked up in all of our books, if there is somebody who's an outsider, if you've read them, you probably are suspicious that person might be up to no good. Not to give too much away, but Anyway, so these people are, I think some of them are even from California. So so anyway, they're there to celebrate the solstice. This federal official is coming, and the Navajo police are in high alert because this is like a big deal. This Washington person, and there have been protests about her. So she's the Secretary of Energy, and because of uranium, so they're kind of expecting something to happen, but they don't know exactly what. So what happens catches them off guard a little bit.
And that's all we're going to say about the plot. Otherwise, there is no point in your reading the book. So, how about...
I do have to say one more thing, though. So, usually I don't write about subjects that are as dark as this. And so I had a challenge with this. And adding to the challenge, my editor at Harper, I gave her the manuscript, and she gave me a few comments, and then she had a stroke. And she's young. She's like, maybe she has a kid who was 6. So a lot of her comments, she's a good editor, but her comments on this book were not as sharp as normally her comments are. So I was, like I said earlier, I had these 2 stories, and I'm thinking they're kind of working together, but not really. But luckily, she had hired a freelance editor who'd grown up on the Navajo Nation, and she knew a lot about a lot of things, and she also knew a lot about just how to put good fiction together. So she was tremendously helpful, I have to say. And so I worked on this book harder than I usually do after I'd already submitted it, because it just wasn't quite, it didn't set quite right. And eventually I got it. And when I got it, I thought, whoa, this is really, I'm bragging on myself, but I was really proud of myself that I kind of figured it out. And I thought, in a way, it was good that I had to go through all of this hard stuff, because the product was really better than it would have been if my editor had been feeling like she usually did and given me 5 or 6 comments, and I had finished it off and it had been printed. So it was a struggle, but I was happy with it in the end.
So it's always good to remember that revision is a big part of successful publication. Very seldom does a book get published that just as it has emerged from the writer. My friend Jeffrey Deaver, who's coming to launch his book on May 6th, he's an incredible thriller writer, intricate plots, all the rest of it. He said to once in an event here that if they would let him, he would hang by his heels from a trapeze over the press and continue to edit while the press was running. And I believed him. He's like that. But, it is important that you have a chance. There's eventually a deadline beyond which you have to let the book go or it'll never get published. But it is great if you have a chance to do that revision.
It is, and it really is great to have a deadline. I could never, before I started writing fiction, I thought, how can somebody work on the same book for 30 years? But now I know. It's like, it's like every book, I can never read them after I've finished them, because I know first thing I'm going to say is, oh no, this is too wordy. Oh, why didn't I make this a little more poetic? Why, I'm just so self-critical. So what I try to do is take whatever I learned on this book and put it into the next book.
That's a sane way to go about it. Now, how about questions from the audience? And would you repeat the question when you answer it so that the people watching can hear it?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Hi, this is really a Dark Winds TV question. It's season 3. We've been watching with great interest. Is there more coming? I know we're almost at the last episode. Just curious where that goes. And then your own, are you deeply involved in the TV series?
So the question is, season 3 of Dark Winds is almost done. Will there be more? And the follow-up is, am I deeply involved in the series? They list me as executive producer, but the only thing I really produced was a signature on the contract saying that they could use Dad's books and the first 4 of my books in the series. And yeah, there will be another season. Season 4 is already getting filmed. They're filming a lot of it at the Camel Rock studio, which is outside of Santa Fe, and some of it they're filming in Albuquerque. And they're turning Albuquerque into Los Angeles in the 1970s. And I think The Ghost Way is one of the books, one of Dad's books that they're using. And that's the book where the young girl, as anybody who's watched Dark Winds knows that they have their own creative ideas about how to do these stories. But in the original, in Dad's book that they bought, is the inspiration for season 4. That's The Ghost Way, and that's the book where a young girl runs away from St. Catherine's Indian School in Santa Fe, and eventually ends up in Los Angeles, and then Jim Chi tracks her down. Anyway, it's a really good story, and I'm curious to see how they're going to envision it. I have to say I've been really honored to be part of the Dark Winds. I think some of what they've done is not what I would do if I was making a TV show, but I'm really happy that they have used so many Indigenous writers, I think wonderful actors, and the TV show is not like the books, but the books are still there. The books are just as wonderful as they were when we all first read them. So when sometimes people send me emails and they say, "Oh, I can't believe it. They put Jim Chi to work for the FBI. What were they thinking?" Or they brought Emma Leaphorn back to life, and they gave Joe and Emma a son, and they never had a son. And I just say, it's different. Dad. Just think of Dad's stories as inspiration. Don't think of them as the Bible. They're just the jumping off point for these writers.
So let's go back and remember that before Dark Winds, there was an earlier TV series. And here's the thing. Tony's books are a huge amount of them is an interior landscape. It's people thinking. They're not as high action. And therefore, it is much harder to make that television because you can't really, have actors just thinking. It just does not work out. So it didn't do particularly well. And I am so grateful to Robert Redford and George R.R. Martin, who decided to do this. George is busily doing all kinds of things in Santa Fe. He and Doug Preston have revived the train to Lamy and on and on. Good for George. He just doesn't want to write his last book. So George is busy thinking of anything he could do besides actually finishing the series. But it's great because they're older. They have plenty of money. They're not in a hurry. They don't need to be famous. And I think that that's the reason that, they took a chance on trying again. But to that point that you were just saying, it wouldn't work if they were really faithful to the books because there wouldn't be enough, dialogue and other stuff to make it work. Did any of you watch the original besides me? Okay, so you know what I mean? So, it's really important to remember that the books are still the books. Nothing happened to the books, regardless. Yeah, I know. Nobody rewrote them with the TV script. Right. Anyway, other questions?
Those two were pretty cute in the jail.
A comment up here about the two in the jail. Robert Redford and George R. R. Martin had a cameo, and they're in jail at the Cayenta police station playing chess. It really was really sweet. Yeah.
Robert Redford, an outlaw again? I know. Wow. So great.
Yes, ma'am.
Will we hear any more about Leaphorn's adventure as a producer, an advisor, a consultant on a story about the novel, a series about the novel?
Well, you sure might, but not in this book. Yeah. But yeah, I liked that idea. So yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Her question was, will we hear more about Leaphorn as an advisor to the movies? So.
Anyone else? Come on, people. Don't be shy. Okay, here's a question.
Yes.
What about Louisa? Is there going to be a comment about her son and everything in this book? 'Cause that was just sort of left, and I was so disturbed by that.
Oh no. Well.
I didn't know if it was okay.
Well, she's okay. Don't worry. I'm glad you're here. I just tell you that in person. Yeah. Yeah, no, I didn't go. I didn't go back to that story in this book. You know, the book I'm working on now. I'm one of my goals is to kind of lightly pick up all of these sort of loose ends that have been left by other books. So yeah.
We have some online questions.
We do. So one question that the audience is interested in is if you have any sort of cultural editor that sort of helps you with editing these books, and do you find that you get any pushback from the Navajo community on any of the subjects that you write about?
I have a lot of. I don't have a Navajo editor per se, but I do have some really helpful contacts in the Navajo Nation who, if I have any questions, they're always really gracious in answering them. In Shadow of the Solstice, there's a little boy in this, and I wanted to give him a nickname. And so he's 4 years old, kind of chunky, a lot of thick black hair. I thought, well, maybe I'll call him Bear. And then I thought, wait a minute, I never heard any Navajo child with that nickname. So I asked a couple of my friends, and they said, no, don't do that. When people are calling their son using his nickname, it would be like they were calling up a bear. I thought, oh yeah, and I'm sure once in a while I have screwed up where there were things that I just didn't understand, and I didn't know that I didn't understand, so I didn't ask the right question. I haven't gotten any negative comments. I think some of it is the decades of goodwill that my dad built up. Some of it is that I tried to be careful. We just donated the desk that my dad wrote his last few books on to the Navajo Nation. And it was really sweet. They came up with a van, and they were so excited, and they very carefully hauled it off to Window Rock. And then the woman who's the acting museum director contacted me, and she said, we would love to have an exhibit of your work and of Tony Hillerman's work. And, you know, we're moving on this. And I mean, I don't know if it will happen in my lifetime because things kind of move slowly. But I was really pleased that they were so happy to have that desk, and that they, you know, held my dad in such high regard, and that they were including me in their, their embrace of my books.
Is there any particular native ritual or celebration that you really love or have had the opportunity to view? And you may not be able to give the details on the native ritual or celebration that you feel very close to.
Oh no, there hasn't been.
Long question, short answer.
It was me with the microphone off. That was Stefania from Italy. She was curious.
Stefania, right?
And we've
what
also
time
got
is it? It's 4 in the morning.
1
You
in the
should go to
morning.
bed.
And we've also got some viewers from Australia. So so we've got quite
tomorrow in Australia, right?
the future. And finally, there was one other question, and it was in regards to, and I think you've answered this, what your association with the show is.
Oh yeah. The other thing, they have graciously invited me to come and watch the filming for every season, and it's really thrilling. I mean, and it also makes me glad that I'm writing books and not doing movies. The last scene I saw was the last scene it's going to be in episode 8 of season 3, and it's when Bernie comes back to the Navajo Nation. I don't think that's any surprise to tell you that. And so I was there for like 3 hours. And the scene is Bernie drives up in her car, Jim Chi is feeding hay to the horses, and he turns around and they smile at each other. And honest to goodness, it took them 4 hours to do that scene. And I thought, geez, I can write that in 3 sentences. But it was, I have to say, I really did respect them for it. The wind came up, and then their horses weren't cooperating. And I mean, it was hard. It was really hard. And so it gave me a lot of really respect for what goes into making those movies. Yes.
Have you met any of the actors and actresses personally and talked with them?
Yeah, yeah. I talked to. I've met all of them when they invite me to go out. To watch them. They're really sweet. They always come up and say hi, and they say, "Oh, we're so glad that we can bring these stories to life." Jessica Matten, who plays the Bernadette Manuelito character, came up to me and she said, "I'm so glad that you created this Bernie." She said, "It's really wonderful to be able to play a strong woman." And Kiowa Gordon said, he's the one who plays Jim Chi. He said, at first I really couldn't get into this character. He said, but now in the second season, he said it's kind of like he's found his rhythm. He said, and I feel like I've found my rhythm in the part too, and in the Jim Chi part. And I thought that was kind of a really humble thing for a guy who makes his living as an actor to say. And then Zahn McClernand, who plays Joe Leaphorn, is really a lovely guy. But he's kind of shy. I mean, he's just but very intense. And so anyway, I always enjoy the chance to be out there with them.
There was one way in the back.
Oh, two. Okay.
You talked, this current book is taking current news stories and turning it into a book. Talk a little bit about your process. Do you really rely on headlines? Do you think about and create different storylines and then just sort through them? Talk a little bit about the process for how you get from a bunch of ideas even down to one.
Okay, so the question is, talk about my process. How do I get from a bunch of ideas down to just one? Oh, it's terrible, I have to say. It's just a lot of wasted time, a lot of kind of writing in circles. But I take that back. I used to say wasted time, but now I realize it really isn't. It's just kind of the way my brain has to massage the ideas until sort of the essence of what's interesting about it shows up. So the hardest thing for me is doing the first draft. So when I'm working on the first draft, like I am now with the new book, I give myself like an assignment of I'm going to sit here no matter what happens for an hour, just an hour. And all I'm going to do is write on this book. I'm not going to check my email. I'm not going to let the dog out. I'm not going to do all of the other things, do the laundry, all the other things that I have to do for that hour. And then after that, I get up and walk around a little bit, and then give it another hour. And I find, even though it's painful, just keeping my brain engaged with the story is the way it develops. And I mean, I know there are some people who just, they think and think and think. My dad was kind of like that. And then they just sit down and put it all on paper. But for me, I have to kind of be typing the words out to figure out what the next word is and the next sentence and the next paragraph. And then once I finally get the first draft done, then I can go back and refine it and take out the boring stuff or some of the boring stuff and find places where there was more potential maybe than I gave it and beef those up. And sometimes find minor characters who are sort of yelling out to have bigger roles and do more with them. And find out maybe a scene where I have 4 characters where I only need 2 and get rid of some of those. So, yeah, for me, a lot of I think what really moves the story forward takes part in the rewriting, but you can't do a rewrite until you have something to start with. So, yeah,
Good
so that's
point.
kind of that's sort of the essence of it.
You also can't really reasonably write a police procedural, which is what these are, with only one case. I mean, it just doesn't work that way. In real life, no cop is just working one case. So, you do have to have, as in this book, we've talked about 2, but there's kind of a third, which is, looking after mama. And so you have to braid 2 or 3 things at least together to come up with a full book.
But, I think that's true of any good fiction. You have to have all those elements together.
But, if you write a short story, that's the advantage of a short story, is a short story has a single focus. And, so a lot of people are good at short stories and have more trouble with long. I find it really interesting that people who write long books some people can also write short stories, but they're basically single plots.
Yeah, that's right. With very few characters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And then there was somebody else over there.
Yes.
2 questions.
And secondly, is the watermelon story and seldom disappointed fact or fiction or a little bit of both?
Okay, I'm not big on adverbs either. So that's an easy answer. I think if when I'm doing the first draft, there might be the adverbs get in there. But then when I'm doing the rewrite, I try to think what's a stronger verb? What's a different way to say this? So that's the adverb part. The watermelon part in Seldom Disappointed. One of the early chapters, Dad talks about his father. He's growing up in rural Oklahoma. They have this watermelon. They've been watching it forever. And finally it's ripe. And when his father's carrying it in, it's hot and the watermelon slips out of his hands and breaks. And yeah, that was a true story. Well, at least I heard it as a child as a true story before it was in the book. So that's all I can say. But my dad told it with such gusto and told it so often that I think some of it probably was true.
That's an excellent point. Right. Well, in our experience, an hour is about as long as you can sit in these chairs. So I think that we should wind this up. And what I would like to do, because whenever I can, I like to give away, I get what are called advanced reading copies by the dozen. I mean, some people think we have a dog sitter when we travel. No, it's really the UPS and the FedEx guy because there is no way to turn them off. You can have your mail held, but it doesn't work that way with UPS and FedEx at all. So anyway, this is a really wonderful story. We have autographed copies of it. It is one of our subscription club picks, but this is about a woman in the heart of the Maine woods who has been hiking the Appalachian Trail and disappears. And the question is, will they find her? And the other question is, why did she wander off the trail? And was there anyone responsible, or was it just she got lost? It's a terrific book. It is multiple book club pick and all. I read it early and I really liked it. So I'm happy to have, other people feel the same way. So this is the book I'm giving it away. Jen, how many numbers did we give out? Okay, so your job is to pick a number between 1 and 33, and that lucky person will get my advanced reading copy, and anyone else can buy an autographed copy up in front.
Okay. 17.
Aha, is it you, Paul? Really? Oh, wonderful. All right. I love it. I will tell you afterward that is the number most frequently chosen by authors for reasons that have never been clear to me. It absolutely is. So when you come back, you can vie to be stage it. So you're number 17 and you will get a free book. Anyway, thank you all. Let's give Anne a big round of applause for a wonderful evening. And I didn't do it, but since I do the Instagram for the bookstore, my only social media, would you all hold up your books and let me take a picture?
Would you send it to me too? And I'll put it on my